Welcome to Lessons That Last, where a researcher and a teacher talk about what it means to make a lasting impact on students' lives. They unpack the stories former students shared about their memorable teachers and discuss how we can all make a greater impact on the people in our lives. Here's Julie and Laura.
Hello, and welcome to a special episode of the Lessons That Last podcast. I'm Julie Hassan, professor researcher, and with me is my favorite published author,
Laura Estes Swilley, co-author of the Lessons That Last text, not just a podcast, but a book that Julie and I put together.
So if you follow us on social media, you will know that we've been counting down to October 11th,
Yes.
which is the official release date of Lessons That Last, the book. I'm throwing confetti.
Yay! So
For those of you
exciting.
who are listening, big circle confetti, because if you've looked at our cover, and we will link it all in the show notes, if you've looked at our cover, you will see that there's some confetti strewn about,
Yes.
some torn yellow paper, and I have to say, we talked through a lot of covers, and we kept coming back to this one
Yes.
because it reminded us of the floor of a school bus on the last day of school.
It did. You've been saying that all along. I love the ripped and creased look of it. And then the idea that somebody might have picked this up off the floor on the last day of school. Absolutely.
Yes. So I took our cover and we put it on some stickers and some bookmarks getting ready for launch week. And I handed a bookmark to Brian and he kept like pressing on it. And he's like, there's a wrinkle in this. And I'm like, no, that's part of the image.
Yes.
Your bookmark is not wrinkled. So I'm wondering how many people will mess with that thinking there's a crease in their book cover.
Well, it's an imaginary crease, but it's also a real crease. Like all the students who have come in and out and all of their old notebooks and papers and all of it jammed into those backpacks. This is what it looks like.
Yeah. And I know we talked a couple weeks ago about the dip in October and
Yes.
beginning of the year freshness and newness and honeymoon and trying to get into sort of a groove and get acclimated to each other and sort of get over that rough patch that is October. And I love thinking about those notebooks, and I was a pencil chewer as a kid, so like chewed up pencils and papers and things stuffed in a backpack.
Yes.
That mark the end of a year. So
Yes.
if all of the new perfect things mark the beginning of a year, all of the beautiful imperfect things mark the end, right?
Absolutely. And then for me, it was all the folders with names on them crossed out, and then a
boy's
new
name.
name, and then that crossed out, and then a new name, and that crossed out. It was kind of like a calendar.
It was.
Right. Yeah.
It was. A little fickle about boys, but that
I
was
was a
good.
girl.
I mean,
I was a girl, not a woman.
Choosy.
Yes. I was learning.
So love's lost and lessons learned all
That's
through
right.
the school year. And you had this vision. This book is your vision
Yes.
of a story for every day of the school year. So
Yes.
talk a little about that.
So when we first sat down on day one to talk about your project, it was really before you started. I want to collect all these stories, and in my head, I thought about it all along as a love story to teachers, like a love letter. It was all about what makes a great teacher. Let's talk to students, former students who know. And when your first book came out, I had already read it probably twice, but when I had it in my hands, I wanted to read it differently. So every morning I would go to my morning duty where I was just sort of standing there, and I would read. a story. I would read a section, maybe a chapter, depending on how much I was interrupted. And I was like so uplifted. Some days I would be reading it in my morning duty, like a little tearful, because you guys know me. I cry now,
She's a
and so
weeper.
I would read it and I would be like, oh, this is beautiful. And I would feel so like energized and like from a heart level, not just like, hey, let's go, but like heart level energized. So I was texting you one day from school and I said, here's what you need to do with these stories. You need to do like almost like a daily devotional, but for teachers, with a story a day where they can contemplate, it can uplift them, it can give them a purpose for the day. And you said, well, we could do that. And I was like, well, that's not what I was thinking about. And there we went. It sort of took off from there. You curated the stories, pulled them from all the stories that you had collected over the years. And then I started looking at them from a teacher perspective. And I tried really hard to open my perspective from elementary to high school, PE, English, science. It didn't matter. How are we going to grow or feel uplifted from this story for this day?
Mm-hmm. And you were the one. So if I take us back to the very beginning, like the seed of an idea in 2017.
Yeah.
About then, when I had to come up with a research question for my new job as a professor, and Mrs. Russell had just retired, my beloved first grade teacher, Nancy Russell. And all I could think about was, that's what I want to know. Like, why was Mrs. Russell so important and continues to be so important to me? And then I thought about we've had so many teachers and so many of them were really good, but there are these few who just stick in our memory so clearly. You remember something they said, or you remember their classrooms, or you just remember the way you felt. So we wanted to ask the question, just tell me about a teacher you remember, which became introverted, highly anxious me through a crazy research design with a sign, like at the flea market and craft fairs, just saying, let's chat about a teacher you remember. And you invited me to your school's craft fair.
We did. We had a craft fair. It was like a community project that, it was lots of vendors, teachers, parents, community members, and people were in and out. And you set up a little table and you had your sign and a couple of chairs. Tell me about a teacher you remember. And lots of people went into that chair, including my father.
Which is still one of my favorite stories.
Mine too.
As has always been our relationship, I had a crazy idea, not quite brave enough to execute, not totally sure how to execute, but you sent people over to that chair.
I did.
All day long. And we knew at the end of that day, there is something about this question, because people like your dad, who's military firefighter, like we know to be a
tough
pretty
guy.
tough guy who doesn't necessarily get mushy or sentimental, cried talking about that teacher. And that's been the case all along, that it touches something in these former students when they talk about teachers who've made an impact on their lives. And I don't know that I anticipated that we would get such specific stories, that they would be these small moment stories. Like I don't think I expected that. I expected people to talk about how they felt, or talk about what kind of people these teachers were. I did not expect these clear small moment memories. That surprises me still.
I think that that's where you came in. So we all have a story, anyone you walk by at the mall, at Burger King, we all have a story about a teacher or anything else. But if you ask me about a teacher, I can tell you. And I think that's true for everyone almost. But once you started gathering these stories, you started looking at threads and seeing, oh, these are the things, right?
Yeah.
Safe and seen, right? And then you built upon that, stretched. How were these stories meaningful, and what can we learn from them?
Yeah.
And I remember your first question, like the original question of this project was, what makes an effective teacher? Not test scores, not evaluations. What actually is it?
Yeah.
And I think you got to some nuggets here that really tell that story and answer that question.
Which is part of the beauty of so many things about our relationship, which is why we've been friends for so long, but we together have this researcher practitioner perspective.
Yes.
So my goal was always to look at this as research. What can we glean from this? And I'm a qualitative researcher. That's my training. So I was using this grounded theory approach. What theory can we build from this? And you kept saying for teachers, yes, that there's lessons there, but there's some beauty in just the stories themselves. Like we don't need all of your analysis and discussion, although you're sweet and appreciate that. But there's some beauty just in the stories that people tell. And I appreciate that you found that. And then I think you were the one early on when we had enough stories that said teachers need this. And we started putting it in a blog because that was the fastest, easiest way to share those stories with teachers. And, that became the Talkin' Chances blog because sweet Jake Sands, my now son-in-law, said, if you have a blog, you have to have a name for the blog. And I think his question was, well, what did Miss Russell use to impact your life? Which was lots of chalk and lots of chances. But you kept saying, I'm out at hall duty. I can't go on the website. I don't want to thumb through your book of research discussion on what this means. Right. I just need to be able to open it up to a story at the beginning of the day. And so you really said, this is what I need and what I think teachers need.
I think that teachers have so much to learn from your research. And that's a whole different story than what we're putting together here in Lessons That Last. Because Lessons That Last can be 10 minutes, it can be 20 minutes, it can be an hour, depending on how much you want to ponder it, how much you want to put into it, how much you want to come back to it and reflect on it. But the actual research that you've put together is much bigger than that. And it has a different value and a different purpose to a practitioner than being able to start my day with a story that uplifts me and makes me feel something that I needed to feel today.
And I love that we left it sort of open-ended enough that people can make their own meaning of it. Like we didn't tell teachers what meaning to make of it. You crafted some beautiful reflection questions to help them kind of get that thinking started. But really, we just gave them some stories. You unpacked it just enough and wrote some beautiful questions so that people can then decide what meaning to make of it themselves. And I think that's so respectful of the professionals that are teachers, who are teachers.
I agree.
Correct.
I agree. And we actually, early on, probably around this time last year, took some of those pages that we had put together with the questions, with the reflection questions, and shared them with some teachers. And I remember one teacher saying, "This story is enough. I don't need the questions." And I was like, great. And another teacher saying, "Oh, those questions really helped me." Yeah. And I was like, great, because you can use them or you can leave them. It doesn't matter. They're there if they help you. The story is what really, really counts. And then I think it was kind of late in the process of writing, we decided to do that index where we looked at stories, not just by day story, but a topic. Was it about culture? Was it about, language? Was it about something different? And I need that. And I can look in that index and find specific stories that are going to take me on that journey or encourage me in that way or give me something to try. So many times while we were writing this, Julie, I was trying new things that I was reading about in the stories that you sent me. And it was awesome because I felt like I'm a reader of this book, not just a crafter of this book.
Yeah. Well, and I always have felt this way about this project. Like I am the carrier of it. Mm-hmm. But these stories are people's stories and they're so precious and they entrusted me and now us with their stories. And I think, at the beginning when we first talked about this project, you wanted to have one for morning, like in the morning for a little inspiration, affirmation to get you lifted and ready to face students and start the day. And so we went into it thinking, oh, this is a morning journal.
Yes.
These are morning pages, and we sent it off to our publisher, Lauren Davis at Routledge, who's amazing. And Lauren always sends it to some teachers, like any idea that I have or we have, she's going to send it to some great teachers to get some feedback. And many of them said, I can't do that in the morning. I have little kids. I live far from school. I'm not a morning person. I don't get up that early, whatever it was. Mornings are hectic. I would do it in the evening. And some of them said, I would like it for Sunday, Sunday scaries, or just to get me ready for the week. And some of them said, I just want to pick it up when I've hit a rough patch.
When I want to pick it up.
Whenever.
Yeah.
And so we broadened it a little. And instead of making it day 1, day 2, day 3, it became lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3. And then you said, I would love to put the themes in an index. And I talked to a couple of principals about that who said that would be so great because if I want to focus on something at a faculty meeting or just send something out to my teachers that we're talking about or working on, I can go in and pull it. So from a morning journal, it became something that was broad enough that whatever the need was or however someone wanted to use it, they could. And I love that it became.
I love that too. It can be used in any way, and that makes it really universal for sure. And if you're like me, who I really was inspired every morning that I was reading this, but in the real world, am I going to read it every morning? Probably not. But when I do, it's still there for me. It's just right there when I need it. If I need a specific topic or if I just want to turn to it, it's the next day in the order of lessons. I think that there's something there for me no matter how many times I turn to the same story.
And just like it took us a little bit to settle on a cover, and then once we found it, we knew like this is it. It took us a little while to settle on a title because our original idea was about morning pages, and so we had to think a little bit about how do we title something that people can use in so many different ways. And we kept saying as teachers, we just don't know how far our influence will go or how long our lessons will last.
Correct.
And this book is full of lessons that have lasted for years, decades. In some cases, I know one woman I talked to had a memory of high school and now she's in her 80s.
Yes.
Decades, those lessons have lasted. So I hope if teachers don't get anything else out of it, they get affirmation that the lessons, whether planned or unplanned, because some of these are just teachable moments, last. That work lasts.
I agree. I think if we go back to my father and his story being a cornerstone story for you, one of your early ones. So he's in his late 70s, and his story was from elementary school.
Mm-hmm.
And once I decided to become a teacher and became a teacher, he has always been so proud of me, and it means so much to him. And it's because he knows the lasting effect of a really beautiful teacher who really touched him. And he says to me often, not everyone gets to impact someone else's life like you do. And that's what this book is about. All of the lasting impacts of those lessons that aren't necessarily curricular, almost ever, because the things that stick with you are the big picture, and that's what these lessons are about.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little girl in a storm who's was in a classroom where the power went out, and teacher picked up a flashlight and a book. It's the boy who didn't make the football team, whose teacher gave him some honest but helpful feedback. It's a million different things to a million different people that have impacted their lives forever.
And I think we can't walk away from any conversation about this without reminding ourselves these teachers didn't necessarily know the impact they were having on these kids, the lessons of your day, the care you pour into these kids, the nurturing, the time. All of that means something, but you don't always know it. And that's one of maybe the hard things about our job, but also one of the really beautiful things about our job.
Yeah. And I don't think we, as kids, realize it at the time. So when I decided to talk to people age 18 to 85, that was a practical reason, right? Because they're adults and consent for a research project is easier when someone is a former student and an adult instead of a current student. But it turns out that was a really lucky move, because the impact becomes more important over time, because we start to connect it with things in our lives now. And so often someone will say, I parent differently because of the way this teacher communicated with me, treated me. I did things and continue to do brave things because I felt worthy because of this teacher. And so I think as time goes on, those lessons last and they become more important.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I think that there was a lot of value in asking former students about their teachers. And you really mined some deep memories and some deep information by doing that.
And people would say, well, I haven't thought about this in years, but all of a sudden it triggered some memory, some beautiful, sweet memory, and they connect it to something in their lives now. And one of those was Jennifer, who has a sweet memory from Mrs. Tillman's classroom. And you picked this story for book launch day because you, my friend, love a metaphor.
I do. I love a metaphor. I'm an English teacher through and through. And I love the idea that you've been talking about with ripples, and the ripples that teachers leave in students' lives, and the way that they maybe get bigger as they go, like you said, for parents or even future teachers. We've heard from military officers, we've heard from business leaders, and who go into their lives, and those teachers are still rippling, even though it doesn't seem like they should. And so I do love Jennifer's story because she's looking at fingerprints. And I thought, how many teachers' fingerprints are on my brain, my learning, my life, my heart. And I just felt so drawn to this story because that's what your whole project is about. If we go back to the love letter to teachers and education, it's about fingerprints. It's about ripples. It's about the things that stay with students for a lifetime.
Oh, what a beautiful lead-in. I won't step on it. What a beautiful lead-in. Would you, Laura, share Jennifer's story about Mrs. Tillman?
I will. As a kid, I was typical in every way. I was average in height and made average grades in school. My performance in extracurricular activities was unremarkable, but my third grade teacher, Mrs. Tillman, always made me feel special. One day during a science lesson on the human body, we used a black ink pad to stamp our fingerprints on a piece of paper. We examined them with a magnifying glass and compared them with our classmates' prints. Then Mrs. Tillman taught us something remarkable. She told us that no two people have the same fingerprints, not even identical twins. I still remember my teacher's words. Your fingerprints are one of a kind, just like you. No one else has the same fingerprints. No one ever has, and no one ever will. There never has been, nor will there ever be anyone else quite like you. I continue to be amazed by that lesson. I work in human resources for a school district now, and I help new teachers complete their background checks. Whenever I take an image of their fingerprints, I tell them about Mrs. Tillman and her lesson. I hope it reminds them of how special they are and of the opportunity they have to help their students feel special too.
Oh, I love that she's sharing that story with new teachers, because now Mrs. Tillman is impacting all of these kids who will be taught by these new teachers who came across Jennifer and heard that sweet story. Exactly. So, exactly. I mean, ripples, yes. And fingerprints that never fade from people's lives. So beautiful.
So beautiful.
Oh, and that's what all of these stories are. And my hope is that teachers who read it will know that there are so many people out there who would tell these same kind of stories about them.
Yes.
I hope it's an affirmation, not just an inspiration, because I always fear as a researcher, you worry that your work will in some way be misused or misconstrued and do harm. So what I don't want is teachers to ever feel like there's this standard from the teachers in this book that's so high that they have to try to live up to it. And I think it's just as important for you and I to say, these are snapshots of people's best moments.
Well, they are
the highlight reel.
Yes, but also if you look at these stories and all the ones we've shared, so this is episode 31. We've shared 31 stories. There are 185 in this text, and none of them, when I read them the first time, felt like some special teacher, someone on a pedestal, someone that I couldn't be or something I couldn't do. These are normal, everyday teachers being normal, everyday classroom practitioners. And it's affecting their students on this level such that they're remembered 20, 30, 40, up to 70 years later. And they're not doing anything special. They are being professionals who are being teachers who care about their kids.
Yeah. Yes. And Miss Tillman lost her patience sometimes.
Oh, sure. She had an October dip.
Days, right? So we're seeing like this moment, this memory. But what makes Miss Tillman so special and beautiful is her humanness, not her perfection.
Right.
Because kids are going to connect with us because we're human. And we're messy and we're honest about that. And we embrace our mistakes and we start over and we apologize and we give them permission to not be perfect either.
Yes. And we tell the truth. And I love that about this story. She was telling the truth about fingerprints. Like it was just science. I say just science. Sorry, science teachers. It was just science.
It's not important. like
No,
literature.
no. It is important, but it was just real. It was just
It's a
science.
fact.
She wasn't trying to embellish on anything. She wasn't trying to make a moment. She was just being real.
Giving them a fact, but also a fact that she knew would touch them.
Some of them
beyond necessarily their knowledge of a content area. And I love that about so many of the teachers in the stories in this book too. They thought about creating a lesson that touched kids' hearts, minds, and lives. So they weren't just teaching facts or content. And I know I said this, I say this all the time about this project. People didn't remember being taught, they remembered being transformed. Yes. They remembered a transformative experience. This wasn't just teaching a lesson on science. This was teaching a lesson about how beautifully and wonderfully you're made, right?
And Jennifer needed that lesson.
Yeah. Well, don't we all? Like I could use
average.
That.
Well, right. But think about the Jennifers of the world who just feel like a regular average kid. There's nothing exciting about me. I'm not the line leader. I don't collect the milk money. I'm not the student government, whatever.
Can't do backflips on the playground.
Right. I'm a regular person. And this beautiful teacher was affirming, even as a regular person, you are special.
Oh, so good. So I hope teachers will put themselves for a minute in Mrs. Tillman's classroom and say, I don't have to do the big room transformation on Instagram.
Yes.
And have the perfect bulletin board or the perfect teacher outfit or the coffee that matches my whatever fancy flat teacher shoes or
that's a lot.
It is a lot. And especially our young ones, like they feel that a lot.
They do.
So I hope this helps teachers understand too, what makes you is what makes you impactful. You do not have to be anything else. You do not have to be an Instagram picture.
No. And when you compare yourself to the people in your hallway or in your building, you're making a mistake because you and your way are enough. When you're putting kids first and you're working on the big things and the small things, that's enough.
It's enough. You have everything it takes to make a lasting impact on a student's life.
That's right. And those lessons last. Ripples upon ripples. And our book is proof of that. Your research is proof of that. There's no question about the value of educators and what makes a great teacher. It's all in the students who tell us about them.
And you may have two giggly girls in an English class or a writing class.
That's true.
Mrs. McCoy, Mrs. Ignata, Mrs. Bryant.
Yes. Yeah.
Who someday grow up to co-author a book.
You never know who they're going to become.
No one would have guessed.
No, that is true. No one would have guessed.
You never know. You never know where they're going to end up. You never know how far your influence will reach. You never know how long your lessons will last.
Oh. Thank you for saying that.
So friends, we would love it if you would check out our new book, Lessons That Last. It's got a story for every day or several for your week or your month or your vacation or whatever you need.
Just the one you need today.
Yes. a little affirmation of your impact. We will drop the book information in the show notes. We would love it if you reach out, if you check it out, let us know what you think, and we hope that it affirms you and lifts you.
Yes.
Happy reading.
Bye, friends. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you will subscribe to the Lessons That Last podcast wherever you listen. Give us a rating too, which will help other listeners find us. And don't forget to visit chalkandchances.com for more stories. You can also find more information on Julie's research in books. While you're there, take the quiz to find out what kind of memorable teacher you are. I took it and was surprised by what I found. I think you'll find good food for thought. Let us know about your quiz results. We hope you will meet us here each week and bring a friend to share the conversation.